Okay, in this video I try and show you this, but it's completely pitch black and you don't see anything much more than an outline. This is a bit of molten aluminium I have got out of my wood heater or out of a fire or something. I've got larger pieces of this, but I don't know what I've done to them. I think I just chucked them away. But you know, this is seriously molten, like a nugget. Now I don't really mention it in this video, but I have played around trying to get aluminium cans like Coke cans to melt, and they sort of, with wood in a 44 or what Americans call 55-gallon drum, you can sort of just get on the edge of melting, and sometimes you'll melt it and other times you'll just sort of, they'll all crumple together but they won't actually go to liquid. And it was experiments I was secretly doing, and with a bit of coal or a bit more fire bricks to keep the heat in, I reckon I could easily do it. But this is some that's occurred in a big junk wood pile, primarily made up probably of African boxthorn or some of the rotted wood around here, and this melted quite nicely. I've also realised that aluminium cans mightn't be the best, and there's another grade of aluminium alloy that melts exceedingly easy, so I might actually melt that instead and show you what that is. So I sort of want to do a third one on production under limited means after I've done me bit about improvised hillbilly talk, and me being the inquisitive little entity I am, I've sort of discovered a couple of things playing around with wood fires and whatnot. And one thing I want to mention first up is blacksmithing. Now in this wood fire here, I put a bit of wood in that was a old piece of construction wood, a bit of hardwood, and it had a bolt through it, and I actually got the bolts to go red hot, and I took them out. And I just grabbed them with my tongs and took them outside and gave them a good thump with my hammer, and I could actually bend them 90 degrees. Just with the heat of a wood heater. Interesting. But I'm not a real expert on blacksmithing. There's a bloke at work who does do a lot of playing around with it. I asked him if he used coal, and he said no, he uses coke because coke is cleaner. Now coke is basically the charcoal of coal, and apparently that's cleaner. And he uses an electric fan as his bellows, but some of you may not know what bellows are if you haven't had much to do with wood fires, particularly if you haven't had anything to do with antiques. Those who deal with antiques will know exactly what they are. And they're basically a thing that's quite easily made out of, oh cripes, if you're real crazy you can probably maybe make it out of plastic sheeting, but you wouldn't want the plastic sheeting to get too hot. But usually they're made out of leather. And you know, you can use those to basically blast air into the fire. And if you don't know what they are, type it in. I think it's BELLOWS. And run a search for that and you'll see what they are and how they work. They're quite easily made too. But he uses an electric fan as his bellows, but I saw something else. Now for those of you who have never heard of them, there are people in Africa, there's actually a lot of people in Africa who aren't Negroes. In West Africa there's a large amount of Arabs and what's known as Tuaregs. And these Tuaregs are smart enough little cookies. Anyway, they get all this old stuff, you know, old burnt-out vehicles and other old stuff in Africa, and they go and basically rip bits of old cars and stuff to bits. And using homemade bellows and charcoal and all that, they do blacksmithing, and they make farm implements such as ploughs to tow behind a donkey, so on and so forth, literally out of scrap bits of metal ripped out of cars and bits and pieces, and homemade bellows, and bada bing, before you know it, they've got a hammer out and they're blacksmithing. And they do all of this in Africa with very limited means to make farm equipment. And it's quite surprising. I actually seen them doing it on TV. And, you know, so blacksmithing is, I'm not an expert at it, but I tell you what, it's not a stupid idea. Now, I'll tell you another one too. I had a bit of mud on my boots, and I just normal soil around here, and it's sort of black clay. And this clay, you know, it was on my boots, and I didn't want to go in with an inch of this stuff on the bottom of my boots and walk it all inside. So I had a bit of wood out there that I usually have a bit of wood near the door and the veranda for firewood, and I had this bit of floorboard there, and I like split it in half, and I thought, oh, that's a good bit, I'll grab that. So I grabbed all of that, and I scrubbed me, scraped the mud off me boot with it. Anyway, later on that night I was there, and I was trying to get the fire going, and I had the bit of mud there, and I thought, oh, I should pick it up. I thought, I don't get my hands dirty, bugger it. So I just chucked it in, and I think the mud was still damp. I think it was reasonably damp still. I'm not too sure, but I think it was. And I just chucked it straight in this wood heater. Anyway, a few days later, I got the little shovel out and my galvanised bucket, and I was clearing all the ash out. And I come across this bit of mud, this bit of clay. And would you believe it, this was fired as hard as a piece of brick. It was unbelievably solid. I mean, it wasn't quite as good as commercial bricks, but it's better than some of the old bricks I've got around here from the chimneys that used to be on this house. One of which used to be in my bedroom, but it's sort of all collapsed. And, you know, it was seriously close to, you know, real fired clay. It was really quite hard. I couldn't break it with my fingers. I'm not joking. That's how hard it was. And that's interesting, you know, to be able to do that. I read of Chinese. I got a great big book on that my uncle had on Chinese style mud brick buildings, and they talk there about firing bricks and stuff like that. And you know, they just use a lot of firewood and fire bricks in these big domes. They've actually got a whole stack of domes running up a hill, and the smoke coming out of one dome will go into the next one and catch the next dome on fire. And it takes, like, you know, a whole 32 hours or something to run the process. But they have 21 domes in a row up the side of a hill, masses of bricks, several ton of firewood, and they light it up, and bang, and then they just let it all die down for, you know, a few days, and then they come in there and start pulling all the bricks out, and they've got all these perfectly fired bricks. So that's nothing to stick your nose up at. If you didn't know, you use a lot of lime and sand in production of mortar. Is, you know, there's a bit more to it now, I think, but back in the old times it used to basically be just sand and lime. And how do you get lime? What you do, you get limestone, the rock, and you literally throw it on a fire and burn it. And you know, that's also used to smelt steel. You get iron ore, and you get ground up limestone, and you get ground up coal, and that's what they use in steel smelters over here right today. They use them all three in powdered form, and they blow them into the air with a big blower, and someone lights a match or whatever, you know, and it basically burns it and it smelts it all. And yeah, so limestone is brilliant. It can be used, burnt to make lime, to make mortar, to put between your bricks. You probably should look into this a little bit more, because I haven't really looked into it in great detail, but I do know it's burnt. And it's also burnt with coal and iron ore to create steel from iron ore. And there's another one I want to mention too, and that's, you're not going to be able to see this very well, but That there is a little piece of aluminium. I keep getting aluminium pulls in bonfires, and every now and then I get one in my wood heater, and it's caused by, well, old aluminium hinges that are on doors, because there's quite a lot of hinges here that are aluminium on screen doors and other doors, and they end up in a bonfire and they melt into a little pool. So it may not be a stupid idea to make something out of clay. I've seen cast impellers for pumps, and if you could somehow make some sort of a shonky impeller thing out of clay, it's probably near impossible. I'm probably talking a lot of crap here, but you may be able to get simpler things, whether it be, I don't know, large bits of rod, so you can put an aluminium rod through something and then hammer it over either side, to sort of use it as like a pin that's holding something else in place. But you can make these by making something out of clay and firing that solid, and then putting it back in the fire again with a bunch of scrap aluminium, crushed Coke cans or whatever, and letting it burn away in a hot fire, preferably with coal, or really good firewood, and allowing the aluminium to melt into the shape of the mould, so that when it all cools down, you can pull out this little clay mould, and sitting in the bottom is this little bar, almost like a little rod of aluminium, and you can use that to drill a hole through something, and drill a hole through a second thing, slip the rod through both of them, and hammer it in one direction, bend it over 90 degrees, and in the other direction bend it over 90 degrees, and then it sort of holds the two things together. That's just a random idea, but whatever you think of, it's not too hard to get aluminium to melt in a fire. So, the other big one I want to mention is pretty obvious. Step back in time. All you got to do is spin back and see how they done it in the early 1900s, and you can do these things so easy, so simply, not necessarily easy and simple, but you will have the capabilities of doing something that you didn't have a hope in hell of doing using modern production methods, because you don't have the electricity, you don't have the this, that and the other, and comparative to the circumstances under which you're under, you may be thinking, God blimey, I'm so glad there's this just straightforward method of doing this thing. I can do this thing or that thing using the old school method from 1920 or 1930 or whatever. And that's a great one, because they didn't have much back then. Technology was very limited, but look, they done it. And when the alternative is having nothing at all, and you finally find the way, it seems like, oh my gosh, it was this easy to do it after all. It may take me, longer, 3 or 4 times to do it than buy one from the shop, but I can't buy one from the shop. So now I can do this thing or that thing or another. Some of these old methods are pretty rough around the edges, believe me, but you can get things done that you didn't think were possible just by, reading about some of this old stuff. Strange but true fact, you can mix milk and vinegar together, I should damn well try it because I haven't, and create some form of plastic. Yeah, apparently it's weak as buggery, but that was what some of the first plastics were sort of based on. I think it was sort of fats and acids or something mixed together. I can't really remember, but yeah, milk and vinegar. Try mixing some together, full cream milk, mind you, and you get some form of plastic out of it. But there's a lot of other strange little methods they used to use and do things out of mixing two things together, manipulating two things that are just run-of-the-mill stuff that you won't have a hell of a job finding, to create something that you really are quite surprised that you can create. So, you know, look into these old style methods, pick up some of these old books in the library, or, you know, dig into technologies of old, and you'll be surprised at how many good tips they got to do stuff that you just thought was just way out of your league, when, you know, basically you couldn't get one from the shop anymore. And, you know, the big thing is, as a lot of preppers say, there's nothing like having knowledge. You know, it's just, knowledge is power, so much so that you know, it can be a game changer just to have knowledge. You can turn yourself from, you know, like I look at some of these yuppies and that, and I just think, where the hell would these people be in the middle of war? They'd be just buggered, you know, they'd be hopeless, they'd be blooming dog meat, you know, they're just, because all they know is the technological lifestyle they've had. You know, when war breaks out, you won't be sitting there downloading Gangnam Style on your tablet. You know, it's sort of, you know, and it's really good to know these methods that things used to be done with when there was limited means, because if you come under limited means, have a guess what? You can probably do these same methods that they used in 1920 when they were under limited means, because the technology was crap. So yeah, there you go. Read some of those old books.